Welcome to everyone who is joining us today. We're thrilled to have panelists from around the country, students and educators joining us today, whom my colleague Sarah will introduce in a moment. First, just a quick note, we are going to be recording the session today. Mostly that is just for panelists, since there'll be panelists on screen, but yeah, just wanted to make folks aware of that. So I want to turn it over to our panelists as quick as I can, because they have a lot more exciting and important things to share than I do. I just wanted to give you a brief update on the series of which this event is a part. So Education Evolving. I'm Lars Esdahl, Executive Director of Education Evolving. We've been publishing a series of blog posts called Ready for the Challenge, Ideas and Evidence from Student-Centered Learning in a Pandemic. And we launched this blog post series back in February and have been posting about once or twice a month or so since then. And we selected, the series is focused on 5 schools from around the country that we selected via an open call. And those schools are listed here, and Sarah will introduce our participants in a second, so you'll get a chance to hear a little bit more about those schools and who's coming from them. So we are profiling these 5 student-centered schools around the country in this series, and we're asking a number of questions through our school profiles and some analysis blog posts that we published as part of this series. We're asking, what student-centered practices have schools used to adapt during the pandemic? How are they measuring their success? And how has it gone? How have they ensured equity and accountability in this period that is unlike any other we've experienced? And I think the spirit of all this is to say, what innovation has happened out of necessity in this period? And what can we hold on to? What can we learn about the way student-centered learning is practiced, the way we define and measure the success of student-centered learning, and how can we keep that as we move towards a more in-person, more normal way? How can we not go back to normal? So that's kind of what this series is about, and we've got a lot of questions prepared to ask our panelists to go deeper on some of these guiding series questions. And we'll be sure to post this in the chat a couple times today, but we encourage you to check out the full series of blog posts at educationevolving.org/ready. The link is also on our homepage, and you can read about, there's a profile on the series homepage for each of the 5 schools that you'll hear from today. There's some thematic analysis posts that dig deeper into some of the things we've heard from the schools. And we're also just want to acknowledge we're grateful to the Leon Lowenstein Foundation for their support for this series. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Sarah, who has been the lead investigator, researcher on this project, and who will introduce the panelists. And while she's doing that, I'd welcome anyone who feels comfortable to introduce themselves in the chat. And be sure when you're chatting to send to everyone, not just panelists. Sarah, I'll turn it over.
Sure, thank you so much, Lars, for the intro. So my name is Sarah Kemper. I'm a research consultant with Education Evolving, and I've had the privilege of getting to know the 5 schools and school districts we partnered with for this project, as well as many of the individuals who are here as part of our panel today. So we're so very fortunate to have 8 panelists today, including 5 educators and 3 students. And we have a lot of questions to ask them. So I'm going to very briefly introduce our panelists. And to our panelists, I just ask that you wave and say hello really quickly when I say your names. So representing Crosstown High in Memphis, Tennessee, we have Ginger Spickler, the Chief of Staff there.
Hi.
Thanks, Ginger. And we also have Harmony Sheftal, who is a 12th grade Crosstown student.
Hi.
Hi, Harmony. Thanks so much for being here. From Norris Academy in Mukwonago, Wisconsin, we have Rob Jackson, who's a learning specialist. Hi, Rob.
Hello.
And we have Talon Vishoff, a 10th grade student. Hey, Talon, good to see you.
Nice to meet you.
From UCLA Community School in Los Angeles, California, we have Rebecca Kang, who's an assistant principal there and also a Teacher-Powered Schools ambassador. Welcome, Rebecca.
Hi.
And we also are very fortunate to have Yoslin Alfaro, who's an 11th grade student at UCLA Community School. Hi, Yoslin.
Hello.
Great to have you. Representing Spring Lake Park Schools in Spring Lake Park, Minnesota, we have Elizabeth Norgren, who is the coordinator of innovative and personalized learning. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Hi, everyone.
And then finally, we have representing West Hawaii Explorations Academy, aka WEA, in Kailua Kona on the island of Hawaii. We have Liana White, who is the lead high school teacher at WEA. Hi, Liana. So in terms of the panel format, I'm going to be posing a series of questions, some to educators and some to students. Some are going to be directed to specific individuals and others are going to be for everyone to answer. But my hope is that everyone's going to have roughly equal airtime overall. And at about 4:45 Central Time, so quarter till the hour, our hope is to open the floor to our audience for some Q&A. So Lars is going to be reading out some questions that come through the Q&A then. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So this first question is for all of our educators here. What is one thing you've done differently since the pandemic started that you are not going to let go of? So, and then also, what have you stopped doing? And I'd like to start with Rebecca Kang. Could you start us off here?
Hi, everyone. So one of the things that we started doing during the pandemic as a counseling support staff is we started to move all of our kind of operational discussions to email. And we decided to bring anytime we are together to talk about students. And so we've shifted our meeting structures in that way. And at first it was really hard because we had to coordinate things like assemblies or events, some of these operational issues, things through, kind of email and text. But then we've gotten used to it. And now every meeting we're just talking about students. And so that has been a big shift in our culture of our school. And that's something that we're not gonna let go. I guess to add to that, what did we stop doing is in our meetings, we've stopped prioritizing operational issues, and we started prioritizing students and their learning and their engagement and the support that we provide them, which has been so instrumental in shifting the culture of our school.
Thank you, Rebecca. How about Elizabeth Norgren from Spring Lake Park? Let's hear from you.
Sure. Hi, everyone. So one thing we took from the pandemic that we will never go back on is we greatly expanded our opportunities for kids to take online learning experiences and hybrid learning experiences, both expanding grade levels. So we're now offering those options K-12, and we're also offering both full experiences online and hybrid, as well as a la carte. So taking just individual courses and things like that. So because we found that for some kids, it just worked really, really well, we were committed to making that offering much more expansive. Something we've stopped doing over the course of the pandemic, which we were kind of heading that direction, but the pandemic pushed us, was we no longer issue Fs. We've switched to issuing not yet, meaning kids haven't shown or demonstrated the competencies, or no evidence, meaning we just don't have evidence of where they currently are. And I think one of the great things that this has done is it's really pushed our teachers to think creatively about different ways that kids can then demonstrate that learning beyond retaking a course or feeling tied to having to just rely on seat time. So.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Liana.
Hi, so yeah, those are really great suggestions. It's so neat to hear from other schools. I think one thing that we started to do, which kind of Elizabeth kind of reminded me of, was at the end of the year or at the end of the semester, rather than grant Fs for that semester, we would outline basically a list of work that the student can kind of take on during that time and make up. And then and then also in the summer, and then rather than just cutting off at the end of the year being, okay, this is done, now you have to start over, just extending that school year into the summer for as long as those students needed to in order to meet the criteria that we had set out for them. So, you know, just kind of letting go of that. I mean, it's kind of crazy now to think about, why did we assume that like the end of the fourth quarter was the last day you could ever learn something, right? So just kind of getting rid of those deadlines that I think we had assumed in the past.
Thank you, Liana. Ginger.
Liana, I'm so glad you said that. We did something similar in pandemic times, but really hadn't carried it over. So I'm going to revisit that. So thank you. I'm learning. One of the things that we did, actually the very first quarter of the pandemic, so that would have been the fourth quarter of the school year before last. So the state of Tennessee basically said that whatever a student's grades were at the end of the third quarter, when they came back virtually, their grades could not get worse, because like everybody was trying to figure everything out, and like they just didn't want students to be penalized, which was great. But that also meant that some of our students whose grades were good were like, great, so I'm done, you know, for the year. So, you know, without having that, you know, kind of the motivation of improving your grades, we offered students the chance to do independent study projects. And so we had about probably 20 students who took us up on that opportunity and did some really, really cool stuff that we would have never thought about, but that gave them a chance to learn about things that they were interested in. Some of them did career explorations, things like, I think I'm interested in this, and I just don't know what those things mean. And so they spent 6 weeks on work figuring those things out. So the way we've carried that over into post-pandemic is that we actually introduced a course this year called Capstone, which at the senior level, which Harmony is, the students every student is doing some sort of independent study project. And there's a version of that at each grade, but it's kind of scaffolded up to that 12th grade. This is fully independent. So just trying to give students more opportunities to pursue things that they are interested in, and to help them discover if that's something that they really want to go further with.
Thank you, Ginger. And lastly, Rob at Norris.
One of the things that we kind of had to quickly adapt to with the online distance learning with the pandemic was, how do we deliver content to students? Having a group, a meet with a lot of people in there sometimes led to a lot of people shouting out, and it was difficult to get through the content. And so we had to adapt and find new ways to do this. Personally, one of the things that I started doing was turning all of my Google slideshows into Pear Deck shows. And if you're not familiar with Pear Deck, it's a Google Slide extension that turns slideshows into an interactive thing. So instead of having learners shout out answers when a question is posed, the question is posed and it shows right up on their screen, and then they can type it in. And this allowed us to have really great conversations, because I could show different responses from the classroom, and it's all anonymous, so nobody knows whose response is whose. And then we can really like talk about the answers provided and get a sort of a better idea of where that learning is, if there's any barriers, or misconceptions. And so that's the thing that I'm never going to go back to, is just a regular Google Slides. I love my Pear Decks so much. I'm trying to think of things that we have stopped doing. And during the pandemic, like, I can't remember time before the pandemic, sometimes it seems. And so I'm not exactly sure what we've stopped doing. I know there are plenty of things, but the thing that I like most about Norris is just we're constantly adapting and evolving. And if we find things that aren't working, we'll let them go and we'll move on to our next best place.
Rob, I think that perfectly summarizes my takeaways from the 5 schools, is just this constant iteration. Okay, that's not working. What can we do differently? And I think these are just, 5 examples of that. But really, if you haven't read, the school profiles in this series, I encourage you to do so, because you'll read a lot of different adaptations that the schools have made, and that I never would have thought of. So it's really awesome to hear them here today. I want to ask our students some questions. So this next question is for any student who wants to answer, but Harmony, I might ask you to go first if you don't mind. So we know the pandemic posed a lot of challenges for students, but what worked better for you during your time of distance learning? What do you wish schools could hold on to once the pandemic is over?
So I think that one of the main things I hope we can hold on to and that I enjoyed most during the pandemic would be asynchronous Fridays. So my school instilled or implemented a model that on Fridays, after having block schedule all week, where we had like an hour and a half classes, Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Thursday. On Fridays, you had that day to, like, basically no classes, and you use that time to catch up on all of your assignments. So now that we're back in session, we are project based. So we have like much bigger assignments than just a few like worksheets turning in. And so it takes a lot more time. I think if we were to implement asynchronous again, it would be more productive for students. Also, since there's seniors filling out applications and there's juniors studying for the ACT and things like that, it's just a time for you to just actually work on the project. Like, you learn the structure and the materials in classes throughout the beginning of the week, and you use Friday to actually build your project and make it more high quality. So it's more productive for students. And then if they have anything else they have to do, including studying or applying for anything, it's just a lot of time. And I think that we are at the age where we need to learn how to manage our time anyway. So this gives us a perfect opportunity to do that.
Thank you, Harmony. I think that we could all probably benefit from an asynchronous Friday. I know I would. Let's hear from Talon at Norris Academy.
So I feel like what worked best for me, which I actually enjoyed doing, was being self-paced. For me, I'm a type of person that likes working on my own, and it helps me focus more. There's not a lot just distractions around my surroundings, and I feel like that I could work better by myself. There's a lot of work that I would read an article and answer the questions, which I like doing instead of reading out in class and answering it with the teacher and stuff like that. I just liked being self-paced by myself, not having teachers around, and just like we would go to class and then we eventually would do that work in class or not in class by ourselves. And that's something I like doing, is self-paced, which I want to hold on to, because that's something that will help me more.
Thank you, Talon. It sounds like there's a little bit of a theme going here, which is sort of that, time to do work independently being really important. Jocelyn, what would you like to add?
Something that worked best for me was checking in with the teachers. Even if it was online, having tutoring after school, or sometimes just to hang out with the teachers on Zoom. It really worked for me, because after just being doing classwork, online classwork, just coming in until the teacher oh, so this is how my day went today, oh, the Wi-Fi was not working, so I was stressed and stuff like that. So it really helped me to get through the days. And I think it's something that we should hold on to even now, for teachers to have their classrooms open for the students to come in when they need help or just to check in with someone.
Yoselin, that's actually a really great segue to my next question for our educators, which is how did you deepen relationships and partnerships with students and families throughout the pandemic? So what strategies worked well that you'll be permanently holding on to? And Ginger, I'd like to start with you.
Yeah, so and it ties into this theme of like flexibility with time, because I feel like sometimes so much of school is about crowd control, which like you hate that, because like that's not why anybody got into education, either students or educators. But when it's different when you're managing a group of 500 students and 50 adults during the day versus saying, okay, people have time to work on their own asynchronous, but that means I can dedicate more time individually to students. And so one thing that we did last year was that our advisors, everybody was an advisor on staff. So that meant like we had much smaller advisories, and every student had a one-on-one meeting with their advisor every other week, which we then would kind of report back to, or not report back, but like check in with parents and just say, here's what we're hearing, here's how you can support at home. And that we were able to do that because we had more flexibility of time. So I think, just spending more one-on-one time with students was huge.
Thank you, Ginger. Liana, did you have something to add to that piece about deepening relationships and partnerships with families and students?
Yeah, sure. So I think, it definitely, relationship building is everything. And, if you don't have a relationship established, it's really hard to do anything meaningful, I think, with that time. And, all of us had this situation where we probably had students we'd never met, and now we have to approach online and develop a relationship online. So I think it really just had everyone, kind of think pretty deeply about how to support. And I think just this idea of continued flexibility, continued reaching out, and sometimes, like what Yasin was saying, sometimes the most important exchanges weren't about content academically. It was just a chance to connect and establish that relationship, which then you can build on later with academics. That's always a lot easier than just the fundamental. A lot of time and energy into that first level, and just how much that makes everything better.
So now I want to hear from students, because we heard this a lot among the 5 schools we partnered with for this project. Like, we checked in with students, we checked in with students, we checked in with students. What should educators know about what's effective in terms of checking in with students? How can educators follow up and check in so that you feel supported but not annoyed? Is that balance achievable, and what does that look like? Let's see. Yaslin, you want to start, since you kind of talked about how that was super important to you?
I think like normally I feel like teachers they go to students and say stuff like, oh, like I see that your grade is like going lower a little bit, and like what's going on. I feel like students, as a student, when I get that question, it's like, oh, like how am I going to explain? Like there's stuff that I really don't want to talk about. So I feel like it will be better if like teachers could approach students in like different ways by starting conversation. It's like, how was your day? Or like, let's say someone's part of a sport or a club, like how is that going? Like kind of like distract students, I would say, because normally like we're in school and like after and talking to teachers a little bit more about school, it gets like stressful. It's like, oh my God, like I want to be off school, like I don't want to talk about it. So I think getting to know the students like in different terms with stuff that are not just about school, but about like other stuff outside school. Like what do you do outside of school? Or do you stay after school and stuff like that?
That's really helpful advice. Talon or Harmony, do you have anything you want to add? How can teachers be supportive but not annoying?
Actually, I do have something to add. So when it comes to being supportive, when I kind of think of support, it's more knowing, like trusting that you can do what you need to, and there being, it's like knowing there's people behind you that like you can go to if you need them. I really appreciate the check-ins that like my school gives me, and like my advisor is always checking in, things like that. It can be constant. I don't personally find it annoying, but I think that what's something that did happen during the pandemic, or that we implemented, that I think could be implemented again, kind of just like when it comes to support, is like resources and office hours being available. So it doesn't feel like students are pressured to talk in that one instance, but there are resources available for them in one-on-one time with their teacher available to them if they need it, because support looks different for all students. Some students need it more than others. And so for those that want the extra help, they have access to the teachers. And for those that don't need it at the time, they know it's there, so they can still feel technically supported because they know that they have resources available to them.
That's a really good point, Harmony. It shouldn't necessarily be one size fits all. Talon, did you have anything else you wanted to add on that
Yes.
note?
Yes, I did. So like, I wanted to just bring up like, for me, I prefer, and personally, I prefer teachers to ask clear questions where I understand them, because I know virtual is very hard to, because they can't really physically show you. You're not in person. You're not at school where they could just like show you how to do this math problem. They have to like probably send you like information, and it's hard to understand the information. So I have to have them ask me a clear question so I understand it. And that content sometimes I feel like is hard, and it's pressured on, it's like pressure. Like I feel pressured when I'm doing those kind of problems, because it's like I don't get that support as much as I did in school, because they can't give us like that much information in virtual. So
Thanks, Talon. That's really important. I think, it sounds like there's also this theme here of like, be cautious in how we communicate with students so that we're not like raising their stress levels over and above what they already are. Kids are stressed to begin with. So how can we approach, both content and then relationship building with still like minimizing this feeling of like, I'm breathing down your neck, or I'm waiting for you to answer, or whatever it might be. So thank you. So I want to turn next to our educators, and I'm going to direct this one to Elizabeth and Rob. Picture your students who really thrived, maybe even more so during distance learning. How are they doing now, and how have you adapted to better serve them? So Elizabeth, can we start with you?
Sure. So I think a couple of the students kind of reference this, but we've definitely expanded our self-directed learning experiences or self-paced opportunities, I think, in all of our courses. But one thing that we kind of took to the next level this year that was inspired, I think, by the pandemic is not just independent study, which I think traditionally is kind of this idea of like the teacher creating asynchronous experiences for the kids to complete, but we actually implemented completely student co-created courses this year. So essentially, if I as a student sign up for, say, like co-created physics, I am given the competencies for that course, and I can design the entire course, say, through the lens of like physics and baseball. So periodically I'm checking in with what we call a learning advocate, just to make sure that I'm, continuing to demonstrate competencies, or that I have different demonstrations of learning in my portfolio. But I think it's been a really awesome opportunity for those kids who like thrived in a really, really self-directed environment.
An awesome example. I would have loved that. Plus, I feel like that's kind of the ultimate thing, right? If you can teach what you're learning, that's sort of one of those ultimate tests of that you've learned something. So love that idea. Rob, did you have something to add on that note of how students are doing who really thrived during distance learning?
Yeah, so I think one of the advantages that we had at Norris was just how quickly we shifted into distance learning. So there wasn't a big break there. Before the pandemic and distance learning, our learners already had online pathways that sort of like scaffolded out their learning. We were a one-to-one school. And so our shift pretty much happened on Friday after learners went home. We had a brief meeting setting up how we were going to continue distance learning on Monday. And so we didn't have a break at all in between learning. And that really helped just sort of set the bar so that there wasn't as much of a lapse or disconnect for our learners. The ones who really thrived during the pandemic, they sort of had communication as sort of like the through thread, where that used to be like they would come into your classroom and quickly ask a question. Now that that one isn't there, just opening up all of the other ways of communication at all sorts of different hours, so they could email you whenever they had a question. They weren't doing that as much before, or we've switched over to Google Hangout chats, whatever it's called now. They keep changing the name on it. And so we were far better communicating with our learners at a distance than we ever were in person, I think. And so a lot of that has carried through. I'm still getting emails from learners asking about specific questions, showing me screenshots of what it is that they're working on. And so we're really trying to encourage that communication to still stay open, even though we are back together.
Thank you, Rob. It's probably also been an exercise in clarity of communication, to Taylor's point. Like when you don't have the face-to-face, you don't have facial expressions, you need to be really clear and communicating what and, you know, tone and all that. So thank you. I want to make sure that we chat a little bit about this data and evidence piece, because this was a really big part of our project. I want to ask, let's see, it looks like Rebecca's not back yet. And Rob, maybe I'm going to go back to you actually to start us off on this question, but I'm really curious to know, what forms of data or evidence have you developed new appreciation for during the pandemic? And what gives you keen insight into how individual students are doing that you hadn't really looked at before?
So I'm going to harken back to my answer to the first one. So with those pair deck slides and the answers on there, being able to not only hear their response in the moment, where if we were in a classroom and I would ask a question, they would give me an answer. I might not process and hold on to that as much. It also doesn't allow me to give very deep feedback on those questions. But when they're logged in and saved into the pair deck, I can go back through them later, provide feedback, and really just kind of analyze what it is that they're working on. And so that has been really helpful for me. The other thing that's been helpful is because most of our work together has been all digital, I can really see sort of their process. So I teach science and math here. And so I can watch them as they solve a problem without being like the annoying teacher just looking over their shoulder. And so I can really look at the steps that they're going and really try and find any misconceptions or barriers and really look at a way to solve those.
Thanks, Rob. That's also a theme. Having spoken to a number of educators, we see people using these, like especially Google Docs or other kinds of tools that can kind of track progress over time, and you can go back into the history and see how changes have been made. People are really using that data to see learning happen. So I appreciate you kind of noting how you use those tools in that way. Rebecca, I wanted to ask you this question also. So the question is, what forms of data or evidence have you developed new appreciation for during the pandemic? And what gives you keen insight into how individual students are doing?
Yeah, I think one piece of data that I've grown to really appreciate is attendance data. So just this idea of who is showing up. And during distance learning, you know, we really felt like we weren't together physically, but we were really monitoring attendance, not just like to make sure our attendance data was good, but just to make sure that students were with us and that they were part of the community. So many times in the beginning, when we would call students about their attendance, it was just a conversation about like, are you doing okay? We want you to connect with us. We want you to show up. We miss you. And really being attendance as a marker of being together, being, in a community and being like a family. So that was an important piece of data. And then as we progressed in terms of learning, we really started to talk about student engagement and online. What does that mean? And now in person, what does engagement mean? Is it work completion? Is it participating in direct and instruction? And we've really realized that the best, right as of now, one way to really measure that is through teacher observation. And again, really coming back and valuing teacher observation and what teachers are reporting is a new data point that I've grown to appreciate and really value.
Can you share what that data looks like for our audience? Like, how are you capturing that teacher observation data?
Yeah, so right now what we're doing is all the teachers are filling out some in our data. We have a database where teachers are filling out, the content teachers are filling out for students. Are they engaged? And it's really simple. There's like mostly engaged, sometimes engaged, rarely engaged. So we have like a snapshot of every student in every class of their level of engagement. And the really powerful thing is not that we have that data, but that it sparks conversations about what is engagement and how do I know a student is engaged? And then we can start to peel back like kind of biases or assumptions we have about engagement and what we consider to be, academic engagement, what we consider, so we start to have some meaningful conversations about that. And so I think that data point is good for us because then we have some measures, but then also it sparks conversations around engagement of learning.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. And that engagement piece was something we heard, I think, from every school, looking into that and how can we track it. Are there any other educators who have a burning response to this question about new forms of data or evidence we haven't yet shared?
I can share a couple of pieces. I think one of the things that really got accelerated through the pandemic is our work towards competency-based learning and just teachers really valuing the idea of looking for evidence of learning versus looking for things like assignment completion or, looking for alternative forms to demonstrate that kids actually understand the content. And then another great thing I think that came out of the pandemic, but we've continued on is some of the teaming structures we created where we're regularly coming together every week to talk about some of the non-academic needs of our kids, things like social emotional data, things we're noticing in terms of engagement, in terms of attendance. So some of those pieces that were easy to lose track of for kids during the pandemic, but that we're wanting to continue to monitor and support. And it's been cool because those teams are made up of like our psychs, our counselors, our admin, our behavior, people, a group of people that can really wrap themselves around the kids and support them in all of their needs, academic and non-academic.
Thank you so much. I'm getting all these ideas of, kind of on this like big picture policy level of what are important measures that we need to be paying attention to and thinking about, other than the big ones that everyone always talks about. I want to ask students what you think. What forms of evidence or assessment best capture whether you're doing deep and meaningful learning? So Harmony, I'm gonna start with you. Could you share your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the best assessment of learning for me, and something that Crosstown has actually practiced the entire time I've been there and has really just been enhanced by the pandemic, is competency-based learning and project-based learning. So like proving your understanding of not proving, but like showing your understanding of a topic or subject through the project you turn in, but the quality of the project and how well you connect it to something else. So usually like the competency is you have a skill or a topic or subject, you learn that, and then finding a way to connect that to a real world issue or situation and being able to make it your own. So you are able to make a project that is your own while also showing how you've kind of comprehended and understood the skill that was taught to you in the first place. And I think that's better than like tests or any other way that is trying to show that you know the information rather than just the knowledge, but also how to apply the knowledge. Because at the end of the day, even after like we're done with school, the knowledge won't mean anything if we don't know how to apply it. So I think practicing the ability to learn and apply that information is the best way to like learn, but also become better for the future.
Thank you, Harmony. How about another student, Yoselin or Taylin? Do you have thoughts on data or evidence educators should be looking at?
Oh, okay, so for me right now, I'm currently working with a seminar, which is like an actual class. And our seminar is like the first seminar where students are student teachers. So like students are teaching other students. And so for me, it's like, I really like how that helps us engage with each other, because we get to see, we take the role of a teacher. So we get to see from a point of view of a teacher, not really completely, but like part of it. We have a process where we plan the lesson. So we first start doing the research, then planning the activities we'll be doing, like discussions, debates, or anything like that. And so I think that really helps me because I'm not just learning, but it's helping me to learn even more by teaching it to someone else. So like teaching other students and seeing how they engage to the lesson makes me think like, oh, like I'm learning, and at the same time I'm helping my community, my classmates to learn more. And so that's an assessment that for me has worked a lot.
Thank you so much, Yoselin and Harmony. I feel like that's so huge, right? Like if you can teach someone something, it means so much more than if you can just kind of absorb or regurgitate it. So I want to just do a quick check on our Q&A. So to our audience members, I don't know that we've had any questions come in from the audience, but now would be a good time if you do have a burning question for our panelists, please do enter them in the Q&A. There should be a Q&A button somewhere on your Zoom app. So feel free to enter those, and we'll get to those in the next few minutes as they come in. I want to ask, I want to make sure that we have time to talk a little bit about barriers to student-centered learning that have come up for schools. So I think, Ginger, I'll start with you, but could you talk a little bit about what ongoing barriers you and your colleagues are facing to achieving your school's vision for student-centered learning, and what would help?
So again, just kind of going back to the topic that's come up several times is just a lack of flexibility. What we found during the pandemic year was that because, no one had prepared for this, our home, we're a charter school, but we're part of a local district. And then of course we're part of the state public school system. Nobody had planned on what the rules and regulations and parameters were for a virtual school year. And so we had a lot more flexibility. Harmony referenced the asynchronous Fridays, which were awesome for students to get a chance to spend some dedicated time on work, but also like those were actually adults sometimes busiest days, because we had so much more time to plan and collaborate together, to have the kind of conversations we needed to have as multidisciplinary groups about students and how we could support students. In Tennessee, at least, is required that students are in front of us as educators 35 hours a week, which leaves a total of 5 hours for all your planning and collaborating and grading and extracurricular things that you're supporting, which is not realistic if you're really trying to give someone a healthy work week. And so I think just having more flexibility in how we use time and even space, like, is it necessary that a kid is sitting in a room and I have checked him or her present for being in this space to know that learning is happening. And I think we've heard from the kids that like they show us that they learn through the work that they do, not by showing up in a specific space at a specific time. So that is where I would, and I know that's different state by state. In Tennessee, we just really don't have a lot of flexibility, and it would be awesome if we could go back to some of that.
I think that's a really helpful perspective and a powerful one too, because you were able to make some of those changes initially and now you can't. And goes to show how powerful that flexibility can be. Liana, do you have anything you want to add about this kind of barriers piece and what barriers you and your team have faced in implementing student-centered learning during the pandemic?
Sure. I think, there's the obvious ones where we're all, separated from each other and having to work through technology. I think ours was somewhat unique in the sense that we had a pretty strong student centered program to begin with. And it was very much like a hands-on, like exploratory type of program. So that was our big challenge was, we would go, what were we doing? We were taking kids and bands down to tide pools and doing data collections and everything, planting and doing everything outdoors. And so, our, like the logistics of that just, were kind of blown up and we had to kind of reinvent, well, how do you, connect and include those types of experiences when you can't all be, somewhere at the same time. So, definitely, I think, but in the same sense, it was a great experiment, and just an opportunity to take a look at everything we're doing and, strengthen the things we can and be creative and, do something new. So I think, the barriers, I think we all felt just the distance was huge, right? That's just the hardest part. And I think, learning how to connect online is a good skill that we all, here we are on Zoom, right? At this point in time, connecting from all across the country, which is really exciting and really great. And I think that was one thing that was really great, that we connected with mentors and scientists that were not necessarily in our direct community, and just kind of really opened the doors to connecting outside of our smaller community. So, it's kind of like a give and take on that stuff.
We're privileged to hear directly from a few students during our interviews about those kinds of opportunities, Zooming with professors across the country or Zooming with a NASA scientist across the country, and just how valuable those were. So it sounds like we do have one question for the audience. Before we do, I have one question kind of on that note for our students, which is, what was the most influential learning experience you have had so far during the pandemic? Taylor, do you have a response?
Yes. I feel like I started a new school during the pandemic. And it was hard at first. I had a lot of support from the staff here. They were supportive. They made me fit in well with all these students. And it was hard to get through. And just be able to I couldn't do like group projects and stuff like that because we're online, and we did some of that kind of stuff, but it wasn't like what we would do in school where we're having discussions and stuff like that. But it took time to adjust to this environment in a new school, especially during this pandemic, that really affected me a lot and all that kind of stuff.
Would you say, Taylor, that there was anything in particular that helped with that transition that you think is valuable for the people here to know?
I would just say take people's help, and just if they're trying to help you, I would just take that support, because if you don't take that support later, you're going to regret it, and that support is going to be very helpful to you.
Thanks so much for sharing. Harmony or Yoselin, you have anything you want to add about most influential learning experiences you've had?
I'll just speak on it a little bit. I think something that was really influential, probably it kind of happened outside of school, kind of just doing school on your own and it being having so much time on your hands and so much freedom. I've definitely learned a lot about myself and not kind of in a negative way at first, turning it into a positive way. Like I learned a lot more about my flaws and how much of a procrastinator I can be and how easy it is to lose motivation. But in a positive way, it turned me to make myself more disciplined and have more like control over my time management, and to just like having that freedom means you have to learn how to be independent and you have to teach yourself those skills. Otherwise you won't be successful when you do have to do everything on your own. I think that's actually really good, is to give like make students have to learn how to do that, because I think the reason I lost much motivation is because the time for school had always been laid out for me, and the time to do work and learn, it was always so laid out, and it wasn't even a question if I do it or not. I just did it. And so then when it's all in your own hands, like you have to find the motivation yourself, and you have to learn how to manage your own time. And that's just a really important skill that I think all students need to know how to do, and that was really brought out of most students during the pandemic.
I think I would probably be a much more productive professional now had I learned that skill in school. So thank you, Harmony. Yoslin, did you have something you wanted to add about your most influential learning experience?
I agree with Harmony. Like, I think also for me, like during this pandemic and like being online learning, it's like it gave me time to like be on my own and be able to like practice those skills where I can like solve certain stuff on my own. And I think it was also like something that helped me to like outside of school is like to spend more time with my family, like to tell them like it really like online learning, it was like so much time to like just even just being at home, even if you wouldn't hang out with your family outside, it's still like being at home and telling them. I was able to communicate with my parents a little bit more about what I want to do in the future, like what I'm looking forward to, and like what how this like the pandemic is influencing me as a person, as a student. So I think that's has been really influential, just like the time of like still be involved with school because I was still doing other programs even like during the summer, but still like I got time to learn about myself as a student and like in my personal life.
Thank you for sharing that. It just sounds like it's so important to have that space to process this experience, your learning experiences with the people you know and love and care a lot about. We have about 6 minutes left. It looks like we had one question from the audience. So I think this is directed toward our educators, but who were students who thrived in online learning that were struggling in person prior to that? Ginger, I see a hand up.
Yeah, I think that's such a good question, and one that so many more people should be asking. And I think of two extremes of types of kids that did better. So there are the kids who, let's just say, are super social and are at high school, as many of us probably were when in our day at high school, for the interaction with peers. And obviously there were a whole lot of negatives about students not being able to be with their peers in person. But for certain students, like, it eliminated some of those distractions that were really keeping them from being from dedicating themselves to their learning in a way that they were capable of, but were just really being distracted from. So I can think of very specifically a couple of students who we were just like, oh my gosh, what happened to you? Like, this is amazing. And then on the other end of that spectrum are the students who are like super introverted and for whom school can be really overwhelming. I mean, it can be really overwhelming for me, but like if you are a very introverted person who has to go to school every day with 500 other people and expect to do all of your learning surrounded by those people, just having that removed took a lot of pressure off and gave them a more chance to just not be so overstimulated all the time. Yeah, and I really wish that we again could have that flexibility, those options for those kids in a way that we're not able to now.
Thank you, Ginger. Anyone else want to respond to that question about students who were maybe struggling pre-pandemic and thrived in online learning? Yeah, Rob, I see a hand up.
Yeah, so one of the groups of students that I started to notice was starting to do really well on online learning were the learners that were maybe had some gaps in prior academics and they were missing things and they weren't participating in a classroom. And it might have been, I don't know, out of like shame of not knowing the things that the rest of their peers know. But when we got to distance learning and there was a little bit more of a distance or anonymity almost with the internet, if they turned their camera off, they became a lot more comfortable to share. We had the flexibility to schedule more one-on-one times to work through them. And so I started seeing a lot of those learners really just start thriving.
There's just so much that we can learn from those kids. I think it's so crucial to pay attention to those experiences. So thank you. We're about out of time. So before I'm going to pass the Zoom mic back to Lars here in a second, but I just want to say to our panelists how much we really appreciate your time. I think for me, one big takeaway from this whole project is just how generous of spirit everyone has been at our 5 partner schools. It's so clear that you not only care so much about your own schools and making them great places to be and great places for learning to happen, but that you care about our education systems and making them better outside your own school. So we seriously appreciate that and thank you for being with us today. Lars, you want to wrap us up?
Yeah, I would just start by seconding everything you said, Sarah. We had a ton of schools that applied to be research partners on this project or were nominated, and it was very hard to pick 5, but I think listening to these brilliant folks here today, you can see how these schools really stood out to us, and it's just been inspiring and so grateful to hear from all of you today. And I just want to again put the link to the series in the chat here and really encourage you all to check out the blog posts and the profiles that go deeper on some of these themes and on some of these schools. I think that's it. You know, it's been wonderful having you all today as panelists, as attendees. In talking with these schools, we heard over and over again, oh, we'd love to learn from the other schools that you're learning from. And so we thought we'd bring them all together in a panel so they could learn from each other. And then our attendees have the side benefit of getting to hear you all learn from each other. So I feel like that happened for me. I hope the other attendees and you all panelists feel the same way. But thanks again to our panelists, our attendees, and have a wonderful evening.